get started. So thanks, Julia, for the facilitations, and thanks everyone for joining. I think it's great meeting you all. And I'm going to lock down all the introductions from Julia in a sense. You see a lot of build up in terms of my background and what I have done and so on and so forth. I think what we are trying to share with you today, hopefully will bring you some new perspectives. When we talk about like achievements, success, like what really define us. I think this journey actually make us really kind of invite me to reflect on what we mean by purpose, career, or what we mean by success and achievements. So I'm going to lock down a lot of the good things that Julia have mentioned about me, and then we can start it over. But I hear loud and clear from all of you. I think it's actually resonating to me because when I embarked upon this research, it was almost like 10 years ago on Buddhist economics. I have the same question because as Julia mentions, I came from a finance background. I have been a Buddhist for, I think, 20 years already, but I have to admit at the very beginning, I have not been practicing or living the Buddhist virtues or values. I've been a very eager and goal-driven banker, looking at numbers up and downs all the time. Even from like initial kind of corporate finance to asset management is the same. We're kind of chasing after money, chasing after time, and chasing after recognition, fame, and success. So I would say, like as Shantana mentioned, economics, the market is now definitely inseparable part of our life. Like it meant to be about very simple household matter to begin with, but now the whole discussion about economics is about not only basic household but also welfare, distribution, well-being, and also to some extent like transfer as well. The questions I think or the challenges we are facing in the world today is exactly what all of you have pointed out. There are so much contradictions. I think from a personal level, from institutional or societal level, and also from kind of an ecological level, there are a lot of conflict, as if the sustainability of the economic activities has to be, it has only be possible if at the expense of the well-being of others. We have to work harder. We have to work longer hours in order to make a good living. Maybe we need to kind of exploit a lot more from other parts of society or from the ecosystem in order to sustain the growth we want to achieve. Maybe we need to sleep less. Maybe we need to worry a bit more. Maybe we need to probably take in a lot more than we can feel comfortable or feel happy or feel whole. So I think that is the conflict, or that is the challenge, or also that is actually the motivation why I became really interested in these subjects. And I think my initial motivation is to think about like, okay, we have this traditional wisdom, just like Shantina talked about Taoism. We have talked about holism before. My connection is with Buddhism and what Buddhism can bring to the current contemporary society, and what is actually the Buddhist response to the economic mechanism that we are living in. What the Buddha would say if he is still living in the contemporary world. How would he react or teach us to be well and be happy? I think that's the questions that I have. And if we are talking about economic or the market as a household, our household right now is on fire. We have this burning desire day in and day out. And of course, like literally, the environment, the natural environment is actually on fire. So we need to think about how to address like all these discomfort or all these stress and anxiety that we are dealing with. Maybe to begin with, I have a lot of invitations to really kind of kick off the discussions by introducing what Buddhist economics is or is not, and how does it compare with the Western economics. You probably have seen this blog post, which Julia and the team has very nicely prepare. This slides actually came in from, it was actually come from the conference that we had a couple of years ago before the whole COVID. So there is kind of a good discussion between the Western economics and the Buddhist economics. Talking about Buddhist economics is a minimizing framework, minimizing sufferings, desire, violence, instrumental use, minimize self-interest, and have this whole notions of small is beautiful. It actually came from E.F. Schumacher. He has a wonderful book exactly called Small is Beautiful. He has these discussions about the possibility of Buddhist economics. He invites us to think about what is actually the appropriate technology, what is actually the good way to develop an economy without sacrificing the well-being of humankind. Of course, on the other hand, the market framework invites us to maximize, chasing after profit, and the relationship that we have with different part of the economic constituents, like may it be the institutions, may it be the workers, the producer, the consumers, is very transactional driven. And of course, because of this maximizing process, the market invites us to desire for more. Greed is good, probably you have heard from the movie. And a lot of people, or actually the market would say desire is actually what, or greed is what really driving the economic force. Without greed or desire, where the growth will come from? Like how could human flourish? I mean, that's the question, or that's the economic narrative. And of course, because bigger is better, or we can grow out of the problem, so we need to keep growing. We need to work harder. We need to grow our GDP. We need to make more money. And every quarter after quarter, we need to be profitable. So this kind of comparison, or I would say this kind of side-by-side discussion is, I would say, one perspective of Buddhist economics. I would actually invite us to think even beyond some of the early Buddhism discussions of Buddhist economics. The reason why I would put it this way, because if we kind of dive deeper, as I would later on, into the whole Buddhist worldview, so to speak, of course, I think one way to address all these challenges or issues that we have is to minimize our desire, to actually focus on what we need instead of what we want. But the underlying worldview of Buddhist teachings could also be very transformational. Transformational in the sense that it could allow for actually more, but more from a very different perspective, as I would further discuss later on. So on this second slide, I would like to add to the Buddhist economic discussions, not only about minimization or kind of minimalism, but also try to think about how we could engage. So to some extent, people would put it as the kind of the Mahayana traditions, or the Bodhisattva, the Buddha kind of, the great vehicle kind of discussions, in a sense of how we can have engage life, even kind of from the Buddhist perspective. I think for both early Buddhism or the greater, the Mahayana tradition, happiness from the Buddhist perspective has to be built up on moral life. That is inseparable. But the Western economic would say happiness is actually through consumptions and productions. You can translate your utility, your happiness through money, and then money could buy you happiness. And wealth is the end. But from the Buddhist perspective, even from different traditions, wealth is only the means to the end. And what is the end? The end is moral cultivations leading to our happiness. And these wealth, different sources of wealth, are the resources taking us through these moral cultivations. So you could probably will gradually appreciate that the whole discussion is basically about human flourishing, how human can develop and transcend throughout the journey, and most importantly, be happy. But of course, the definitions and the discussions of happiness is very different from the mandate or the general regular discussions of happiness. And these deep understandings of dependent arising sounds very technical or very like theological, but basically is about like interdependent connections, like how we are connected to one another. How things comes to be, like it is being created or is it being produced or being invented as the Western economics would argue, or is it actually being transformed, or is it being dependently arise? I can give you an example, like for example, when we talk about a furniture, a lot of people will say like we have the GDP when we create a new furniture, but from a Buddhist perspective, you're just changing the form or the shape of a piece of wood to another shape or form, which could serve your functions. And of course, like if you use it 1 year and throw it into the dispose, then it's transformed into a different way, but it is kind of a wastage in the process, even though from the Western economic perspective, it's creating GDP. So if you look at kind of Buddhist economics, sometimes you would realize maybe a lot of the economic activities are actually not value adding. It's not adding to the flourishing of any species or any any sentient beings, but is adding to the GDP. From the Buddhist perspective, we talk about non-self, we talk about independent, or I should say actually not independent, it's a typo here, it should be interdependent leader. So for example, if we are talking about our relationship right now, so I could say I'm the speaker, you are the audience. From the Buddhist perspective, we would say like I am no person, I'm just kind of a maniac if I'm just talking to the screen and there's no audience. So the very fact that I'm a speaker is dependent on your participations, and at the same time, like your being an audience is also kind of dependent upon like there's someone facilitating the whole event. So we need the Zoom, we need the internet connections, we need the electricity, building all these things together. Whereas like from the Western economic perspective, we say, oh, like I am the leader, I'm the speaker making this talk possible. In fact, like we are co-creating the whole events, we are co-creating the whole ecosystem together. So that I think that is also another very important differentiating concept from the Buddhist perspective. And then of course, like Western economics, because like time is actually quite I would say like quite calculated or quite instrumental. So there will be a lot of past regrets and future anxieties. Whereas moment by moment, the whole discussions from the Buddhist economic perspective, we appreciate the present moment and understand like how the present moment will actually lead to the developments or the conditions in the futures. But we be mindful and we appreciate like what we are experiencing at the present moment, and that's why we can find and bring happiness to the present. The Western economics is short term, and the Buddhist economics is sustainable because they think about the impact that it has made whenever it is actually engaging in activities. Though the Western economics is driven by greed and fear, whereas the Buddhist economics actually is actually very focused on free and fearless. How could we be free? Is we are free when we are not being attached to our material consumptions, or when we are not attached to a lot of the labelings that construct our own identities. So we will talk about all these later on a little bit more. And then I think the final important ingredients I want to share with you is the Western economic is very transactional. It's like very focusing on what we can come out of, what is actually the utility can be generated through the transactions and the economic activities. Whereas because of the moral considerations, the relationship between the different constituents and the different participants of economic activities, or just like any activities, are very, very important. And that's why we'll focus on the relationship. May it be between human species, between human and the communities, and also like with the ecosystem. So the reason why I was saying all these discussions has to be contingent on like a very deep understandings of the Buddhist worldview, is because like if we can appreciate how the Buddhists see the Buddhist teachings or the Buddhist studies see the world, we can make sense of the whole things that we just talked about. Like even from the first slide when we talk about small is beautiful, or the second slide when we talk about how the dependent arising, or how the relationships are important. So I have these acronyms, or put it in as kind of simple models of EOS. So E is about the theory of knowledge, epistemology. So we have like all these constructions of ideas, concept, and worldviews. In our daily life, we keep thinking about in the context of right or wrong, good or bad, material, spiritual, for profit or non-profit. I think also that is also exactly the conflict sometimes we have. And when we're talking about the divide between our daily life and where we want to do good, but at the same time, we want to do well in terms of our financial well-being. And also there is a lot of contradictions between like value and price. So there seems to be like an inherent conflict between the market and the spiritual life. And the O, I refer to the theory of existence, ontology. It refers to the identity, the beings, or the relationship that we are establishing like through our experience. In our common experience, we think a lot about me, myself, mine, or you, yourself, and yours. To some extent, the market economy very focused on the individual experience, preferences, and also like how it is actually related to others from a transactional or instrumental point of view. So that's why, as Julia would try to present at the very beginning, like there are a lot of build up, like, oh, Ernest has been doing this and that, like he has studied this and that. Seems like there are a lot of things that build up who we identify ourselves with, like what is actually our identity. And there are a lot of focus on egos and silos. So I would like to invite you to maybe we can pause for a few seconds here. So we talk about the differences between the two worlds, like the Western economics or the Buddhist economics. We kind of look back on our experiences or where we are right now in terms of like our achievements, what make me feel, what make us feel satisfied or happy. I think the questions I would invite everyone to think about is, what do you think it would take to get you to the next level? It could be taking you to become to the next level so that you'll be happier, or you feel like you have some other objectives or you have some other goals. So maybe we can pause a little bit and ask ourselves, what does it take to get you to the next level, whatever the next level is. So maybe the first question is like what I want to achieve next. What is actually the next level that I would define? And then the second level the second questions would be, what does it actually take to get you to the next level? So if our life is like this balloon, the balloon, of course, like you see the energy, the heat, the air, the feeling of this balloon, right? But this balloon actually require a lot of things to piece together. Sometimes it could be our friendships, our power, our respects, our career. It could be money, family, or fame. We may think that if we have all these pieces together, we'll be able to make a big balloon. And then with the heat and the air, the balloon will inflate, come to a big enough size, and then it will rise above. What are the pieces that you find most important to you? Like if you imagine that you're constructing your life, so to speak, through all these different pieces, what are the most important pieces to you? And what do you think would be the pieces that you cannot do without? What is actually the next level that you want to achieve? And then what does it take for you to get to the next level? It's quite an interesting question. Huh? Here, I would like to share with you one very interesting remark I appreciate from David Brooks. He was speaking to, I think it's the graduation class at the University of Chicago. I think to him, what he really aspired for is to know how to see, the yearning to be wise, and the yearning for ideals. I think it's actually quite profound. But I think in the process, we need something to sustain our well-being, our physical or material well-being. How could we balance it? How could we navigate or bridge, as some of you have mentioned, the divide between our material development, for-profit development, and then the spiritual development, or the charitable or the purposeful developments? It's not easy. I think very often we find it actually quite challenging, because we feel that we are struggling in the process, and as if like we actually need to trade off. We need to give up something in order to be something else. I think one of the key, I would say one of the key message I would like to share with you today is you don't really need to have that division. So you don't need to have that divide. We can transcend, maybe a very strong word, but like we can somehow rise above these conflicts by adopting a very different worldview. And this worldview is the Buddhist worldview that I would like to introduce to you. So what is actually the Buddhist worldview, right? So here I put it into the acronyms of BEOS. So B is the Buddhist perspectives. So from a Buddhist perspective, the theory of knowledge is very different. So how we think about ideas, views, concept, and worldview is different from the, I would say, the contemporary world or the economic considerations. Very interestingly, the Buddhist worldview is actually non-attachments to views. Any attachment to views will lead to conflict, and is actually not kind of a complete understandings of the phenomenal existence. And I think a lot of us in the kind of creative industry will realize that very often the creativities would be restricted if we feel that like we are attached to like one way of thinking or the other. So our possibility is also limited, like when we feel that we have to be this, or we have to stick to these ideas, or we have to stick to this concept. The Buddhist understandings of knowledge is actually dependent arising. Like even our concept is dependent arising. I think one way to understand or appreciate it is culture, or like the way how we perceive certain ideas or concepts is actually very dependent on our upbringing and our educations. Or our family actually would influence the way we think very, very deeply. And building up on this kind of theory of knowledge, instead of thinking about good, bad, I'm not talking about good, bad from a moral perspective. Like I'm talking about like good, bad is sometimes like we put judgment on the outcomes. So I would I would invite us to think about like sometimes the outcome, good, bad, who knows, right? And we have to be moral anyway. And we have these contradictions between profit or purpose. Who cares? It seems to be a little bit kind of intimidating, but I'm kind of inviting us to think about ultimately, like the one who cares is actually more important than whether we are for profit or for purpose. Like we have to be kind anyway. if we think about the theory of existence from the Buddhist perspective, the identity construct is very different. Like we're not talking about all these ego, I, me, myself, but we're talking about how to arise above our own self-identity. Think about the possibility of who we could be when we are not bound by our old version or our previous self. So that's why I think the easiest way to think of it is sometimes people would say selfless, but I would say, why don't we say we could be a self on demand? So today I could be someone kind of putting on a very serious outlook, sharing with you. Tomorrow I could be someone just be a good friend or be a good family member. We can put on different hats depending on the circumstances. We can also, I think, equally important is to think and also to see from other people's perspective. It's very often the self construct doesn't allow us to actually think from the other perspectives, and that also restrict our ability to help. I think one very interesting discussions from the Buddhist perspective is they talk about how the Bodhisattva have 1,000 arms and how the Bodhisattva can transform into 100 different shape or forms depending on the needs of the sentient beings. So the Bodhisattva or the Buddha could be a beggar on one day. He could be a government officials on the other day. He or she could be presenting as Christian, or the other day he could presenting as Julia. Or sometimes he or she could be like a horrible person, or in some other occasions he could be a very, very kind person. Depending on what the counterparty needs, he tries to present in different shape or form in order to help. So the theory of salvations from this Buddhist perspective is we are not happy because of what we have or what materially we own. We are happy not because of our fame or our identity. We are happy when our mind is truly free and fearless. Very often we are constantly in anxiety or fear because we are afraid of circumstances that we do not want to see. We are concerned or anxiety. We are feeling very anxious about uncertainty. Of course, we want the good outcomes to sustain, and at the same time, we want the bad outcome to be away as soon as possible. It's just like right now, we all want the COVID to be away tomorrow, if possible. But we know with the right mindset and with the right worldview, we know that a lot of these are contingent on different conditions. Like we are not the master of the universe that we can control everything. And with this deep understanding of how the world operates and constructs, our mind can be truly free, and we no longer have to be worried about yesterday or tomorrow, what we have and what we have not. And that's why I think to answer or respond to many of your questions, or this kind of divide or these kind of conflicts that we have, I suggest here a 6I. So the 6I is basically bridging the different kind of worldview that we have from the Western economic worldview, or from the kind of the mandate worldview to I would say like a Buddhist worldview, which could actually set us free and allow us to be happy. So from a theory of knowledge perspective, we talk about from independence to interdependence. So we understand how our relationship, how the world construct, how ideas, concept comes to be, instead of thinking about things arise out of nothing. We think about the different conditions leading to the arising and the seizings of phenomena or ideas or concepts. When you think about identity, instead of thinking about our individual self as we see or define who we are because of our academic or career achievement, because of our social recognitions, we think about like how we could be our whole self with or without these different building blocks, so that we can be integral. I think one thing that I particularly want to share with you is sometimes people think that they need to be a different person when they are on work or off work. So when they are at work, they have to be like aggressive, they have to be mean, and they have to be very greedy. Whereas like when they come off work, they want to be the kind person they aspire to be. From the Buddhist perspective, I would unfortunately share with you that it's not possible, because you are your whole self. If you compartmentalize your morning self, your work self from your long work or evening self, it doesn't work. You cannot compartmentalize your charitable self from your for business self. You have to be integral. And I think that would also address a lot of sufferings that we have nowadays. And finally, is the theory of observations. We have to develop a much better understanding of what we just talked about, knowledge and existence. So from ignorance, we develop insight. So the insight is exactly what we just talked about in terms of developing and constructing a complete different worldview. So the last two slides that I have is an invitation. So if we bring all these theoretical, or sometimes you would say like very kind of high level discussions into our daily experience, I think particularly for many of you leaders, managers, or consultant, what does it mean? I think what it means is like if we want to inspire or drive change, as Shantina last time have introduced to us, like we have to think like water. I would add one more is you have to think like sound. That the quality of water and sound is indeed inspiring. In a sense that I think Shantina last time when he shared with us Taoism, like water is formless. But I would also add to the very fact that like water is formless, but they can travel afar. And nourishing without any bias. Like the water would not say that like you are a bucket of muddy and dirty water, I'm not going to flow through this like bucket of muddy water. And like if we kind of somehow run into a beautiful lake, like it would flow into a beautiful lake too. And if we think about like being a leader, very often like we want to be the tip of the wave. You want to see the energy, the movement, but at the same time it dissipates really fast. You want to actually be part of the whole body of water that drives that change. So of course, like the tip of the wave is exciting, is of course like eye-catching, but ultimately you want the whole body of water to move, and you cannot really differentiate like whether like this droplet of water is different from the other. Another wonderful and beautiful analogy we have from the Buddhist scripture is talking about sound. The sound again is also shapeless, but as you know, like in space, like through the like radio frequency, it can travel so far away, like in 1,000 light years. And I would also share with you this whole discussions about compassion and wisdom. With compassion, it gives us a deep understanding of how people perceive and feel. With wisdom, like we can develop a completely different kind of understanding of the world people are living in. And I think that's why I quote these two poems in Chinese. Is the one in the middle basically is say like whatever is of shape or of form can never be large. Whatever is have no form or no phenomenal appearance is actually real, or real truly exists. The other poem on the left is from the Tang Dynasty. It is actually very beautiful. It actually can kind of inspire us in terms of thinking about the search that we are going through, the journey that we are exploring. The poem, like if I translate very quickly, basically saying it's like, I wander all the way day and night trying to find spring, but I cannot find spring. Spring, like as it's like a kind of a season. I even kind of step through mountains and to the tip of the cloud. My shoes were all worn out. When I come back and I smell the tip of the flower blossom, then I realize, oh, by the way, the spring has already can somehow reach to the kind of the peak of the spring already. So we have been wandering all the way around without realizing actually we have everything we need. Whatever we need to be happy, whatever we need to be successful, whatever we need to be of help and contribute to other success as well. So my questions to you is the last one I have here. How these different perspectives will change your views on true impact. So we all want to make a difference. I think we all want our lives to be meaningful and purposeful. But having somehow gone through what we discussed just now for like 20 minutes, 25 minutes, well, how does it make you think differently or change your views on true impact? The other questions that I invite you to reflect or to think about is, how are you feeling in this journey? Like we have been working really, really hard, helping ourselves, helping others. Do you feel like you're heading toward the right direction? Are you still carrying the raft or the yak? What it means is like we have a lot of different tools for us to go through in this journey. The yak or the raft is one that we need to help us to cross the other side of the ocean. But are you carrying it like throughout your journey, like even though you have already crossed the ocean? And I would also invite you to imagine how you could change your understanding on the following: your roles, your views, your concept of time, silo, like we have all these kind of department, we have all these different talk about like departments, different society, different kind of identities. And what do you think about like being a leader and the boundaries that you always sometimes feel challenged or feel bounded by? And what about rules and formalities? Okay, with these kind of questions and inquiry, maybe I should stop there and then I will pass it back on to Julia so that we can have some deeper discussions.